the agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Today on the show, a week since the Boston Marathon bomb attacks. How does the fight to stop terrorism look now? That and more today. It's time to talk. Those two deadly explosions, a tragic reminder to Americans and the world that security is never secure. The manhunt for the suspects, it drove home our sudden dependence on big data. Today, the good, the bad, and the ugly of capturing everything we see. Well, here in Europe, the sputtering economy and frugal consumers are proving to be more than just a speed bump for the auto industry. Car makers call it a crisis. New auto sales have plummeted across southern Europe and even in Autobahn mania Germany. Today we ask, are cars simply too expensive, or have Europeans lost the drive to conquer the road? And we all know they make children cry, but they are fundamental to health, fighting disease, and even building an economy. I'm talking about immunizations. 20% of the children born today are not immunized. International efforts are making vaccines available in more places than ever before, but there are parents who say immunizations may be doing more harm than good. Well, I've invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest says that the world would be a terrible place if the advance of immunizations was to be halted. I'm happy to welcome to the show today Mr. Gérard Krause. You're head of epidemiology at the Robert Koch Institute here in Germany. That's kind of like the watchdog institution for the nation's health, Mr. Krause. So you know how important it is when we're talking about immunizations. You know, we take for granted today that in most of the world, children, they don't get polio or they don't die from the measles. But you say now is the time to maybe remind people that immunizations should not be an afterthought.
Right, we shouldn't take it for granted. We need to continuously remind ourselves this is a result of our efforts, and just continue that road.
All right, well, we're going to talk about those efforts in just a moment. My second guest says that the auto industry crisis here in Europe means no new manufacturing plants, and maybe we may even see a car maker not survive. I'm happy to welcome to the show Mr. Frank Schwope. He is one of Germany's top auto industry analysts. He knows his cars, I think we can say, Mr. Schwope. Is the Eurozone crisis and the recession, is that all to blame here? Or isn't it true that the car sector in Europe has needed an overhaul for a very long time?
Yes, I think we have two main problems in Europe. One problem are the uncertainties caused by the debt crisis in Europe, and the second problem are the scrapping bonuses which were paid in several countries in Europe in 2009.
Oh yeah, those bonuses for people to buy new cars. I remember reporting on those. People said that they would end up haunting us. We're going to talk about that in just a moment as well. And my next guest says that the response by U.S. authorities last week to the bomb attacks in Boston was a product of a Homeland Security system that has changed radically since 9/11. I'm happy to welcome to the show Salvador Santino Regilme. He is a U.S. counter-terrorism expert. Interesting question. Before we talk about the specifics of what we saw in the last week, what grade would you give the United States right now in fighting terrorism?
I think it's a very satisfactory way of responding to Homeland Security, particularly with terror threats. So in a scale of 1 to 5, it's 4.
Okay, so which is a very good grade.
Which is a good grade.
Okay, yeah. A lot of people are talking about what grade the American security forces should be getting right now. Law enforcement officers in the U.S., of course, working on the Boston case, they say that 19-year-old Gérard has admitted to having a role in last week's attacks in Boston. On Monday, he was charged with using a weapon of mass destruction, and he could face the death penalty. Now, from his hospital bed, where he's recovering from gunshot wounds, he said that he and his brother acted alone and that he knows of no other terror plots. Well, the quest is on to determine why and how the attacks happened. What we can say today is that this terror attack occurred in a society that is very different from the one of 9/11. Homeland Security is a completely revamped paradigm in the U.S., and the way you and I interact and communicate has also changed through social media and smartphones. And we're going to talk about all of that and how that affects the fight against terrorism. But first, we want to go back to Boston.
Cameras at the finish line captured the explosions. Tens of thousands were packed onto Boston streets for one of America's most famous races. 3 people were killed and over 170 injured in the blasts. The suspected bombers were 26-year-old Tamerlan Tsarnaev and his 19-year-old brother Johar. They were ethnic Chechen immigrants who had settled in the U.S. The search for them began after they were caught on camera at the Boston Marathon. Police tracked the two to nearby Watertown. Tamerlan was killed in a shootout with police, but his brother remained at large. This was the climax of the manhunt. A thermal imaging camera kept watch over the boat where Johar Tsarnaev was hiding. A robot pulled back the tarp covering before police moved in. A team of interrogators is waiting to question the surviving suspect. They hope he'll be able to provide answers about a crime Americans may never understand.
Santino, a lot of people would want to contradict you and say that the fact that this attack took place in Boston proves that Homeland Security is not what it should be.
Well, I understand the frustration, but we have to understand also that intelligence or gathering valuable, timely, and actionable intelligence is a very difficult business. And we can probably view this attack as just one of the very few. It's a statistical anomaly. We can probably say, or we can even have hypothesized, that the U.S. Homeland Security apparatus has dramatically improved to the point that it only happened just now, and they were able to minimize the damage. So,
I mean, do we, go from the starting point that the FBI, the CIA, that they're stopping attack attempts all the time in the U.S.? I mean, are we talking about there being an average of 5 a week or something? Those numbers, of course, are not made public.
Of course. As a social scientist, we don't have access to the data. But what he can say is that in case of intelligence failures, and probably this could be a case of that, we can say that it can only be publicized. But of course, in a lot of other attacks or probable attacks that could have happened in the U.S., in Homeland, or somewhere else with other U.S. allies, we can say that they were not publicized. So I think we have to make credit to the U.S. Homeland Security apparatus for this.
I mean, I remember when the bombs went off, and we were covering it. And what struck me, comparing it to 9/11, was that we saw the police move in, we saw the state police move in, then the FBI was called in, and for the journalist, there were no ambiguities about who's responsible for what. On 9/11, that was not the case at all. If you when you have an event, 9/11 obviously was bigger than what we saw in Boston, but this cooperation among various agencies seemed to be seamless last week. Is that the legacy of 9/11 and what happened afterwards?
Yeah, I think it's a legacy of 9/11 because you can see the expansion of the national security apparatus. There are 2 major improvements here. First, they lowered the threshold for for terror attacks or probable terror attacks. So that means to say that they treat everything as if there could be a possibility of a terror attack happening. And secondly, you actually dismantle the difference between domestic intelligence gathering and foreign intelligence gathering so that they were able to synchronize and harmonize the cooperation between CIA, FBI, and other Homeland Security agencies.
Also, we were talking about in Boston, there were hundreds of officials from the various agencies there. A lot of them have security clearance. It's easier to get security clearance now, isn't it, in the United States?
Well, based on the account of Dana Priest and William Arkin in their investigative report from the Washington Post, there are around 850,000 Americans who have top secret clearances. And that's a very astonishing number.
850,000
Americans who have top secret clearances.
Okay.
That means to say that there are also, after 9/11, there are around 1,200 government organizations working on Homeland Security and Counter-terrorism or top secret programs. And at the same time, 2,000 private companies are working also on in cooperation with the government organizations. So you can see this expansion of the coercive apparatus of the state that we have to take into account, why we can say that the first response to Boston bombings was quite successful.
Okay. I want to talk about this expansion in just a moment, but let's talk about the two suspects just for a minute. We don't know the history, obviously. We don't know why they did this, what compelled them to do it. There are signs that the older brother who died, that he became radicalized in the United States. And if that was the case, are we talking about failed integration, something that actually has nothing to do with Homeland Security per se? And are we talking about another change of paradigm, that immigration and programs for integration also have to be considered an item of national security?
Yeah, that is correct. There could be other explanatory variables for us to understand better what really happened. And the motive is not yet known as of the moment. And that's the reason why the Obama administration, especially during the first few hours, was they were quite cautionary whether or not it's an act of terror, because the motive is unknown. So how can we actually say that's an act of terror?
And let's play with words for a moment here. Let's say you have one person who's crazy, who puts a bomb together and says, I want to blow up a post office. Is that considered an act of terror in the 2013 definition? In the 1990s and the 1980s, someone would have said that that was just a terrible crime that a crazy person committed.
What made the 9/11 quite different, it's a critical juncture, because after 9/11, everything that we see that there seems to be destruction of private property at a massive scale, it's already about terrorism. So from a criminal justice approach, there's a paradigmatic shift towards national security and public security approach. And that's the reason why we seem to have our hunches saying that it's an act of terror immediately.
Yeah. What we also saw, and this is something that all of us we've seen, all of us use social media, we're connected to social media at some point, is the prevalence of social media to get information out. When they apprehended the 19-year-old, they didn't hold a press conference. They tweeted that they had apprehended the suspect. That's how much things have changed. I don't know if that would happen here in Germany, for example. I don't know if Germany is that far with Twitter and with Facebook. But the United States is so dependent now on social media. If you consider that and look at crowds of people, hasn't our perception of crowds changed, or doesn't it have to change? Because when I am with a bunch of people, it's no longer just me and the people there. It's also everyone else through my smartphone and my social media accounts. That has to have implications for national security.
Definitely. It has clear implications, because you're actually contributing to valuable intelligence, especially right now that you have aggregate data from large number of cases, and you're part of actionable intelligence. So I think it's helpful to the national security apparatus, but at the same time, you don't know that you're already contributing.
Yeah, let me ask, Mr. Schwope and Mr. Krause, what do you think about this? Last week, when the search was going on for the suspects, there were on several news websites, but restricted to the internet, there were all kinds of postings about showing people who had the same type of backpack in the crowds during the Boston Marathon. And those pictures were put online for the whole world to see. A lot of people say that that is labeling someone as a suspect in a crime, which would not have been possible before social media. But now, because everyone takes pictures of everything, we have evidence. How do you feel about that, the possibility of social media being used as that type of bulletin board after a crime has taken place? What do you say?
I feel quite uncomfortable about it.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a risk if you delegate too much of what officials and police and the state should do to the crowd. And we know that people, it eventually leads to people taking premature decisions, maybe wrong decisions, without having the full picture. and that there's quite some risk involved.
What do you think about this, Mr. Schwope? I mean, is it a disturbing trend, what we saw last week in Boston?
Yeah, I mean, it's necessary to use this social media if you have such a strong crime. I mean, each technology you should use, and if you have the possibility to use this social media, why shouldn't you use it?
That's an argument. You could also say we should take it even further. It will soon be possible to have drones flying in the airspace of the United States. What are the implications there for national security?
Well, there are implications to national security because it could be much more effective, much more accurate. But at the same time, an important question here is about human rights and civil liberties, which is, of course, still a constitutional question. And a lot of social movements, I mean, civil society groups, are questioning the way that it is being implemented, for example, with the border, United States border and the Mexico border.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. It's interesting, too. I was reading that Iran had sent its condolences to the United States for what had happened, but at the same time, Iran had said, why does the United States use drones in Pakistan and Afghanistan? Because those drones can kill innocent people. And so it brings back this fight against terrorism, brings it right back to Boston and U.S. airspace. Where do you think we're going to be 5 years from now in terms of gathering evidence to help Homeland Security? Boston has shown us that everyone, if they're in the crowd, that they are equipped to provide reliable evidence.
Mm-hmm. I think the trend will be that there will be an expansion, there will be more expansion of the security apparatus. There could be more drone development, further innovative developments in the drone surveillance, probably not only for averting possible counter-terror attacks, but also for the public provision of public goods.
And do we have to come to terms that there will probably always be other Bostons?
It seems that Americans, for example, are already very much vigilant about it, and they're very much willing to provide intelligence in, let's say, in social media. So I think they're quite acceptable. I mean, for them, it's already acceptable to a certain extent.
Right. That it's inevitable.
That's inevitable.
Yeah. I mean, that's also part of the tragedy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. All right. We want to move on now, and we want to talk about cars. Now, if you are deciding anytime soon on taking a new job here in Europe, my advice to you today, do not consider becoming a car dealer. These are some of the hardest times for the auto industry that Europe has ever seen. New car sales are dropping across the continent. In Germany, they fell 10% in February, year on year. That's just 1 month. Now, the recession in the EU is certainly partly to blame, but have consumers also veered from the path of always having to own a car?
Europe's car market is in free fall. New car sales in the first quarter of 2013 fell by over 10%, as biting austerity and soaring unemployment discouraged consumers from making big purchases. Crisis hit Cyprus saw sales reach rock bottom. Registrations there fell by nearly 60% in March compared to last year. Even Europe's strongest economy saw big declines. Both Germany and France posted massive drops in sales. Among the big economies, only Britain bucked the trend, reporting an increase of over 7%. The downturn has weighed heavily on carmakers' bottom lines. Ford plans to close 3 plants in Europe, and German carmaker Opel says it will stop building cars at its Bochum factory by the end of next year. After a year and a half of falling sales, what will it take for Europe's automotive industry to finally bounce back?
That is the question, isn't it, Mr. Schwope? Are we even at the point where we can talk about bouncing back here with Europe's car sector?
Yeah, I mean, for sure the European car sector is running very, very, very bad. But you shouldn't forget there's still the US in the world, and there's still China in the world, there's still Brazil in the world, and also Russia. I mean, everybody is talking since years about the BRIC countries, and the future for the European car manufacturers is in the BRIC countries, for sure.
So you mean, okay, as being exporters or moving production to those other countries?
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds like you're saying that we should forget about ever having growth again. in the European market? We should get used to shrinking.
No, for sure not. We are shrinking, yes, that's no question. But I think last year we sold 12 million cars in Europe. It's a level we had in the 90s. And I mean, once you reach the bottom and then you start again. And I think, or I expect it will be 2014 or 2015 that we are growing again. But we shouldn't forget that in 2009, as a follow of the financial crisis, several governments gave scrapping bonuses to the people. In Germany, it was very much money. It was 5 billion euros, so that you could.
We have to explain that too for our audience. Everyone was offered a rebate if their car. I think it was the car had to be 7 years old. The car that you had,
older than 9 years.
Older than 9 years old. If you would get rid of that car and buy a new one, the government basically gave you money.
The government gave you 2,500 euros money, and it wasn't only...
It was a hit. It was a big success, right?
It was a big success, and it wasn't only the money from the government. I knew an example. VW Golf cost 20,000 euros or 21,000 euros if you take a diesel engine, and you get 2,500 euros from the state. You got from the dealer some money, and you also got indirectly money from VW that you had incentives of 7,000 euros almost.
7,000 euros, yeah.
And it's unbelievable, and I mean it destroys the market in the next years.
Were you for the rebate? Because there were some auto analysts who said it'll work. What was your position?
I mean, I don't like. I mean, it's not a rebate. It's a bonus you get from the state, and I don't like this bonuses. Why do you pay bonuses for the car industry? You can also give a scrapping bonus for your washing machine, for your refrigerator, for your computer, whatever. Why, especially the car industry?
Did you take advantage of it? Did you buy a new car?
Not me, but my girlfriend.
Oh, your girlfriend did. What about the doctor? Did you go out and buy a?
No.
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 No. You were here then? Were you here then?
Since 2009, public transportation is preferable.
See, you're here as a public transportation. That brings us to the other topic about the notion of the attractiveness of cars here in Europe. Is the romance with the car fading in Europe? This continent has great public transportation. Gasoline is very expensive. Insurance is incredibly expensive compared to other countries. Sometimes you have to wonder if it makes economic sense to buy a car in this country or in Europe.
For sure, it's always a question of economic, but in general, you hear these arguments very often. I mean. I heard or I read studies that young people prefer a mobile phone instead of a car and all these things. But I think on the long run we will have growth again. A car is still important to go from here in Berlin to the seaside or wherever. It's much more easy, and if the people have the money and if the people have more certainty about the future, I think there will be growth in the German and in the European car sector.
What about the car makers themselves? You think the market could do with some consolidation, maybe seeing a couple of some names go out of business?
Yeah, for sure. I think they are very in danger. Is Fiat Chrysler, for example. They depend very strong on Southern Europe. They don't sell as much in China or in the US as, for example, VW. And another brand or another company which is in danger is for sure Peugeot Citroën, the PSA group. They also depend very strong on Southern Europe. They had losses last year. Meanwhile, VW earned 11 billion euros. I think there is time for a consolidation in the European car sector, and I think one or two of these European companies will get problems in the next years. And if there is a problem, I think you will find a Chinese investor.
An investor to come in. I mean, you don't see them going out of business completely.
Yes, I don't expect that a brand as Fiat or Alfa or Lancia or Peugeot will disappear. I don't think they will. I don't think they will disappear. I think they will survive, but maybe there's a new owner in China, or maybe in 10 years in India or wherever, or in Russia.
Well, what about having imports coming into Europe? Let me ask all of you what you think about this. Why not buying an Indian car or a Chinese car or a car made in Brazil? You know, since we were talking about the BRIC countries, their labor costs, their unit costs are much lower than they are here in Europe, particularly here in Germany. So wouldn't it make sense, let's say by the year 2020 or 2030, that we have people driving cars that were, I don't know, made in Rio or made, outside of Beijing? What do you think, Doctor?
Just reminds me, when I was a child, we had the same discussions about Japanese cars.
Right.
Now we are very much used to buying Japanese cars because their quality is just comparable to the quality of the cars we can get here. Mm-hmm. The prices also, by the way.
Yeah, the prices are. But I mean, when you talk about a 7,000 euro car, that is probably something that you could get from India or from China, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, offered in Europe.
But it's already offered in Europe from Dacia, the Renault brand, for example. You already can buy a car for less than 7,000 euros. That's not the problem, I think. But I think the Europeans need, or they want high technology, and they want security in their car. And a low-cost car from India for 5,000 or 3,000 euros has not the standard as European cars have. But on the long run, in the year 2020 or whenever, I'm sure we, as Mr. Krause already said, it's as the Japanese in the 70s, they started in the 70s, then in the 90s, Kia, Hyundai, Daewoo, the Koreans started in Europe to import, to bring their cars to Europe. I think in the years 2020, we will see this from Chinese companies. Until now, I've only seen 1 or 2 Chinese cars on the street. I don't know if you have ever seen a Chinese car in Europe or in Germany, but I think in the years 2020 it will start.
I wonder, though, will the Germans remain the car buyers that they are? The Germans are willing to spend a lot of money for technology. And it was even predicted earlier this year at the CeBIT trade fair in Hanover that by the year 2025, all cars will be equipped with technology that will allow the driver to not drive on German roads by the year 2025. So we're talking about, this is all going to cost a lot of money. If Southern Europe is recovering from the era of austerity, then you only really have the Germans who have the money to pay to finance that type of car market. Can the German economy support that? I'm asking you to be a big optimist here, Mr. Schwope. Do you think that in 5 to 10 years that the Germans will still be willing to spend the money that they spend on cars now?
I'm convinced. I'm very sure that people want to have a new car, that they want to have the newest technology, that they want to have, if you have an accident, you want to feel secure. And this needs, there's a need to buy new cars year by year. And maybe in the year 2025, there are cars which can drive on their own, but there will be still these old cars on the street. But in a new car, you will feel safer than in an old car.
Do you drive a German car or a non-German car,
Yes,
Mr. Schwope?
I don't have a car, but my girlfriend has.
She has a German car. How did you get here today, by the way?
By train. It's it's much easier.
All right.
No question. It's
this is a man with a small carbon footprint. Very good. All right, we want to move on now and talking about something that is maybe even more important for everybody, and that is our health. Doctors in Britain are warning of a possible measles epidemic. Now, it's because parents there are failing to have their children immunized. The fear factor is high for some parents that vaccinations will make their children sick. It's a trend that we are seeing not only here in Western Europe, but also in the U.S., and it comes as the international community continues to make progress in getting children immunized in regions of the world where access to vaccinations, well, the access has been practically impossible.
Their discovery has saved countless lives. Vaccines have reduced or eliminated many infectious diseases that once routinely killed or crippled. A small but vocal group of opponents, however, has long claimed vaccines are dangerous. Those arguments still persuade many people to skip the shots. Some developed countries have seen a resurgence of diseases that had nearly been wiped out, including meningitis, whooping cough and measles. Many children did not receive the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine a decade ago after a doctor suggested a link between the vaccination and autism. Those claims have since been discredited, but controversy still surrounds the MMR jab. Could anti-vaccine sentiment give defeated diseases a second chance?
Mr. Krause, it's amazing that we're even talking about that in the year 2013, that we could, in developed places in the world, we could be seeing epidemics, diseases that we thought that we had basically eradicated.
Yes, we have some drawbacks every once in a while, but on the long run, it's working fine. I mean, the number of vaccinations are increasing in Germany year after year. Also globally, the number of cases going down. For polio, for example, last year we only had globally 230-something cases of poliomyelitis, which is the lowest number ever. So there's progress, but there's people, they don't see the fear of the disease anymore. They don't see how disastrous the illness itself can be. They have been accustomed, they have been used to the protection of the vaccine, and so now they focus so much on the danger of the vaccine instead of the danger of the disease.
Is there a simple solution to getting rid of this fear about vaccinations? I know that a lot of parents talk about this triple immunization that you get, and that having a connection to autism. And is it possible, instead of having 3 immunizations at one time, just to spread those immunizations over a period of time, months or a year? It's
possible, but it wouldn't help at all. It's just a matter of sharing information, making information available, and making clear that wrong information is just wrong. And that needed some time, because this accusation of associating this vaccine with autism was just completely nonsense. But it was very attractive and distributed itself very rapidly, so it took a long time to spread the information how it is.
Yeah, I mean, spreading the information, it's important that you say that, because we've been talking about social media here, and the reports coming out of Britain, for example, about this fear of an epidemic of measles, they talk about neighborhoods, well-heeled neighborhoods where people are well off. There you see a lot of social media traffic with mothers and fathers sharing information that they've heard from other doctors. Is social media, is it being used to actually defeat the progress that has been made decades and decades of using the science behind immunizations?
No, I don't think it's being used to defeat the progress. It's just a way to communicate, a very efficient way to communicate, and correct and incorrect information spreads very rapidly through those media. The problem is it's very easy to spread a certain accusation. And it takes a lot of money and research to prove that it's not true. It's always more difficult to prove that something is not true than to prove that there is something. It's very easy to spread an accusation. It's more difficult to demonstrate that this accusation has no basis.
Let's talk about sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Those are areas, of course, where you have children who are being born who are not being immunized. There is progress to talk about, isn't there?
Yes, incredible progress. I mean, measles is a disease that just kills children in Africa, still does. And those numbers are reducing. Latin America, for example, was able to completely eliminate polio already 10 or more years ago. And they have already eliminated measles. So the whole continent is free of measles and free of polio. We can reach this also in Africa and in Asia. And there's progress in the way.
How much does a measles vaccine cost for a child?
Well, that depends from the country where it's being sold, but in those countries where the need is most, it's just a matter of a few cents or dollars.
Okay.
It's not the issue.
Okay. Because I've been doing a little bit of research on what it costs to immunize a country, and one criticism is that for certain types of vaccines, sometimes the pharmaceutical companies will charge $20 or $30 US dollars, and that seems to be crazy considering we want every human being on the planet to have this. I mean, the economies of scale should tell us that vaccines should practically be free.
There's a big difficulty if you have a new vaccine with modern technology, that a lot of research investment was put into developing this vaccine. Then those who made this investment want their money back as soon as possible, of course. And so there's a conflict of interest there, and it would, of course, be nice to have this vaccine free of charge available for the whole world, but that's an economic problem that is not easily to be solved.
Let me ask the other gentleman, this notion we have here in Western Europe, and that we also see in North America, that maybe we should forget about immunizations and put more investment and hope in cures for ailments. What do you think about that? I mean, do you share with what Mr. Krause says, that there's just a lot of misinformation that's being spread about immunizations?
I think European countries or developed states should be, I mean, it's not mutually exclusive. I think they should make these vaccines more accessible to developing countries, probably free. And at the end of the day, you also develop some other cure or medical solutions or remedies to much more complicated diseases that are still plaguing developed countries, or in Europe and America, for example. Because at the end of the day, they have normative responsibility to these countries, and there's a lot of negative externalities if you don't solve this problem in Africa or in Asia. Some of these will be migrating eventually in Europe, in developed countries.
Right. I mean, it's like we said at the beginning of the show, immunizations are also part of having a viable economy.
Absolutely.
And I still think that probably a lot of people in the developed world just don't think about it anymore. I think that this awareness that we're talking about this week, maybe that's why it's so important. Does everyone here at the table know if he has all of his shots? I mean, do you know? I mean, I won't ask you to pull out your book with your immunizations, but I think if you walked down the street and asked people if they know if they've had their tetanus shot, they might not know. And you're saying, Mr. Krause, that level of not knowing, that it needs to be changed.
Well, yes, we just need to constantly remind ourselves that this is not something that just happened by coincidence. It's happened because the vaccines work so well. And that is why we have those diseases. We don't have those diseases anymore, or hardly don't have them anymore here in this country. But we need to continue vaccinating in order to keep this level and to even expand it. We have even the chance to eliminate the disease completely, as we were successful in smallpox. We don't need smallpox vaccine anymore because we have eradicated smallpox from the world. That's a huge success. And now we are about, and we have the potential now to eradicate polio if we continue at this pace for the next few years. And we have the potential to eliminate polio from the world.
Okay, I mean, that's good news. Are there other potential vaccines in the pipeline? I know that we hear a lot about the HPV vaccine for young girls that's given to them. Right. Is that a success story?
Those countries who have rigorously implemented it already show big success, like Australia, for example. In Germany, it is recommended, but the acceptance in the population is fairly low. So we are unlikely to see any significant effect on the population level soon.
And let's just talk a little bit of medicine about this. Why are people reluctant to this new immunization?
There's fear there's too many immunizations, that children could suffer from getting too many shots, that there should be side effects associated with the vaccine. There had been some allegations that people had died in temporal correlation after receiving the shot, and then there was an association that there was a causal relationship to it. Investigations have shown that this was not the case, but nevertheless this image remained.
Yeah, I mean, there are still people who get, I mean, do you all get a flu shot every autumn?
I don't belong to the people who should get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I hear it every year. People say, I got the flu shot, and then 2 days later I had the flu.
Yeah.
And medically, that's not possible, is it?
Well, it may be possible, but we have investigated this. It's just not. What is true that you get symptoms that are very similar to what people think is the flu, but the real flu is something much more severe than the symptoms that you get after the shot.
But we're running out of time here, Mr. Krause. But I want to come back to this point where you just said about the population, particularly here in Germany, being open to more and more vaccines. Why do you think there is resistance there? I mean, what is it about society that makes people resist it? I mean, I think the idea of a vaccine is great. I mean, you get a shot and you never have to worry about anything else. It sounds even better than having a cure.
Of course.
Because you never get sick.
It's always better than a cure.
But why do you think there is this resistance then? What's going on there?
Well, I think Germany has a special tradition on being, has always been a strong movement of kind of romantic cultural beliefs. But also, we feel we are healthy, we don't have the fear, we don't have the threat, and so why should we do something against it if we are well off? So that's something, you need to do something extra for something that may come much later. Right. That's difficult to conceptualize.
Right. And when you're young, you think you're immortal anyway, so that you're not going to get sick. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We've run out of time. Thank you for watching. That's going to wrap up my agenda this week. Don't forget, you can watch the show again online. And you can also write to us. Don't be shy. You can tell us what you think about the show. Our inbox is always open at agenda.english@dw.de. Stay tuned to DW. We're going to have more news on the Journal coming up at the top of the hour. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Join me next time when I set the agenda.